My name is Elizabeth and I'm the mother of 3 donor-conceived children. I was married in 1974 and assumed that very early on that we'd conceive a child, which didn't happen. So we started looking into why there might be an infertility problem. And my GP was the one that I first went to. And for about a year or so I saw him and nothing further happened. So I asked for a referral to a gynaecologist, and he happened to be involved with the Royal Women's Hospital. So having seen him, and at that stage for the first time my husband actually had a sperm test done, and that's when we discovered that he was the one that was infertile. So the tests that had been done on me were actually rather incidental because I was fertile and he wasn't. So within a short space of time we'd been referred to the reproductive biology unit at the Royal Women's Hospital, and that's how I came to be on the program. Well, the clinic was at the Royal Women's Hospital was actually, I can't remember which floor it was on, but it took a whole corner site, and walking in there the first time was really quite a daunting exercise because you weren't quite sure what was going to happen. And over a period of many months, because I was actually a long-term member of the program, I got quite used to getting my early mornings in there and battling Melbourne's traffic and getting there in peak hour. I have various tests and things done to see if I was ready to receive treatment. And you'd see the same people there month after month, and then sometimes that person wouldn't be there anymore and you'd hope that they'd had success where you hadn't. But because it was all very confidential, we never exchanged names. We knew each other's first names because that was what we were known by. But otherwise there was no communication between us after that event anyway. So in hindsight, it would have been nice if we'd had some sort of group of the parents who could have been a bit of support for each other. Because it was very early days of doing anything like this, and it was also the fact it was very secretive, because we were also told that the records were to be sealed, and so there was no point actually having any information about the donor because you would not ever be able to contact them or know anything further about them.
Could you talk a little bit more about, I guess, the secrecy at the time and what you were told? Were you told anything about whether to disclose to your children or not?
It's interesting. The advice that I remember was that we were told pretty much to go away and when we had a child, just enjoy having a baby and not to worry about anything else, because there was that aura of secrecy about it. Nobody in my family knew. My parents didn't know, no friends knew. I think they knew that we were having infertility problems, but we never discussed it with anybody. So it's been quite an exercise now since I've started to tell my friends in the last 3 or 4 years, who've all been put little bits and pieces of the jigsaw into place and known that that's when there were times when I was really unhappy, because in total I started in the program in 1978 and I didn't actually conceive until 1980. So I'd had 15 rounds of inseminations before I conceived twins, and I'd had enforced breaks from the program as well when they tried to work out why I wasn't conceiving. The other thing to be mindful of course, is in those days IVF was only available to people who were infertile, and because I was fertile, that I didn't qualify for the program. So in this day, you'd actually probably have, say, three rounds, I understand, of donor conception, and then you'd be put onto an IVF program. But that's not what happened back in the 70s and 80s.
Can you speak a little bit about the process of choosing a donor and how that happened for you?
Well, the only thing we were ever told is that they would match to the best of their ability my husband's height, eye colour, blood group, and we knew nothing more about our donor at all. And here we are talking in February 2018, and it's only a week ago that I actually got more information from Melbourne IVF and discovered during that time I had 7 donors on the program, which I didn't know. The one donor, of course, is the father of my 3 children, but I don't recall being told that I was ever given different donors, apart from this last one. They did mention that he was super sperm and that would I give it a go, and so success. So yeah, that's what it was like. So we didn't have any information, and again it wasn't until 2015 when I first found out through Melbourne IVF that I could have had access to the basic information about my donor, but we were never given it at the time. Maybe we never thought to ask about it, I don't know. I just remember being surprised that that was available and not suggested to us.
Did yourself or your husband at the time receive any counselling, or were you offered any counselling at the time?
None whatsoever. There was no counselling offered. I think it was a thing that you just went through. It was like, okay, you've got to fill in, tick some boxes and go down and see the counsellors, and then you can come up and be part of the program. But there was no follow-on with that. I think counselling would have been a good idea for my husband, or even if it was offered, he possibly wouldn't have been receptive towards it. Because I now understand that it must have been very, very difficult to find out that you're infertile. You assume always through your life that you'll get married, have kids, and everything will be fine. But it's not always the case. And in his case, it didn't happen. But he was lucky enough to have 3 wonderful children, and so we're lucky.
Great. Do you think, Elizabeth, you could talk a little bit about your decision to tell and how that came about with Louise and your other 2 children?
2 children, yes. Given that there was always an aura of secrecy about being donor conceived, I as a mother felt that there was actually an evidence-based, kept on growing, that you actually should tell your children. And my husband was not of that view. He thought that was not necessary. It was opening a can of worms. We've all sort of Pandora's box, and used those terms before. But I would now and again hear something about blood donors or people receiving bone marrow, and thinking, what would happen with my children if they needed that? And they turned to a cousin only to discover that, in fact, they weren't related at all. And that would be an awful shock. So it preyed on my mind. And when there was a time when it was a fairly emotional time with my daughter and I, and she was questioning her father, and so I said very bluntly, well, actually, Louise, sit down. He's not. There's another story to this, and I want you to know that you were conceived in love and very much wanted, but this is how you came into being. So shortly after that, I also told her siblings, and Louise, being a very modern young woman, got immediately onto the telephone and internet, and within a very short space of time had actually found out all the things that I'd been wondering about for so long, about who the donor was, what his characteristics were, and how many children he had, which was rather a frightening prospect. As a parent too, that was one of the things that concerned me, that maybe within the Melbourne metropolitan area, my children might meet actually their half-brother or sister, and how difficult would that be if they formed a relationship and we wouldn't have even known about it. So there are 14, I think, including the donor's 2 children. So I think it is important for these things to be talked about and for people to be told. So you asked me before about when I started to tell the children, and one of the reasons I did was that one of my daughters had a problem with some breast cysts, and they were fortunately benign, but they said to her, do you have a history of breast cancer in the family? And she sort of said, no, of course not, we don't have anything like that I know of. And I knew that that was not the case, because I didn't know what the donor's family was like. And because she couldn't prove there was any genetic link at that point, she was not eligible to have BRCA1 or 2 testing without a lot of cost involved. So again, my sort of moral strings were being pulled at that point, and I thought that she needed to actually find out about the circumstances of her birth. So to me that was important. So genetic was certainly a reason for telling her. And within a very short space of time, we'd actually made contact with the donor, who was very on board with the genetics as well, and has put together a family tree, and certainly got my interest in it as well, because it forced me into getting death certificates of various relatives that I wasn't sure what they'd died of, because he wanted to put a comprehensive list together of what cancers or things might have been in the family that needed to be known by future generations. And that's what he's done. just recently I was at a Time to Tell seminar, which was run by Varta, and for me, it was very interesting to see how things had changed so dramatically. There were people there who were looking at having donor eggs or sperm, and you realise what a climate of freedom of knowledge is. So it's completely different to what it was that when I went through it in the 70s and 80s. And I had no choice about who we might have as a donor. I didn't know anything other than the hair colour and eye colour, no idea about profession at all. So it's very interesting to see how much more open it is rather than the veiled in secrecy as it was back in those days. It's culture. We've moved on in life, and that's it's good. It's a good thing that we have.
Fantastic. And do you think DNA testing has also played a role in the changes?
I think absolutely. In fact, this morning I did my DNA that's gone off to Ancestry. So who knows what I'll find about the rest of my family that are out there. I think DNA testing, yes, for me it's sort of more a familial link that I'm trying to track down what happened to some relatives in the past and where they were. But I think DNA testing is something that will be used much more frequently in many fields of medicine within the next decade. It's interesting to reflect as well as to how times have changed and how my thoughts have grown with this as well. And back in, I would say, the mid-90s, I started to think more about the children's future and what they might want to know and what no. And I, in fact, having very computer literate children, I was really concerned about them following any searches I did on the family's computer at home. So I took myself off to the library one day trying to find out more about what had happened to the records of donor-conceived people. And I couldn't find anything, and I sort of hit, in my sort of fairly Luddite way, a bit of a brick wall. So when I ended up discussing this with Louise, it would have been much more helpful if we had something then that we could have drawn on. I don't know that a lot of people know where the records, for example, of the Royal Women's have all ended up initially at Melbourne IVF and now with Varta. So it's a bit of a minefield for those who are trying to find out this information. I actually put a letter in with my will and hoping that I'd get a chance to tell the children first, but at least there was some information there if something happened to me. But I gathered from talking to some of the Varta people that children can be very angry if they find that letter they're hidden in their parents' papers, that why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me know about how I came into being? You asked me the question about had we ever thought about telling the children, and my husband was very resistant to that. So I think probably because we knew it was always to be anonymous, we felt that there wasn't much point in giving them information that could never be followed up on. That was so we decided to keep it completely private, not tell anybody. It wasn't even discussed with our GP. Nobody knew but the treating doctors at the Royal Women's. Nobody else was aware of it. Again, a climate of change now, and it's very different. But that's how it was then.
What impact do you think that had on you, having to keep that secret, and then the impact that had when you told Louise at a later stage?
I think for me it was a great degree of relief when I finally told Louise, because I'd been thinking about it for such a long time and felt they should know. And I suppose as any parent wonders how your child will take this information. Will they be cross with you? Will they run away from it because they don't? You've completely destroyed their version of what their life was all about. Was it a big lie? But it's not, because they were all conceived in absolute love, and that's what we wanted, was to have children. I mean, I'm an only child, and one thing I knew that I wanted, if possible, was to have more than one. My mum couldn't have any others, and that was so I missed growing up with a background of siblings, and it's what I wanted for my children and what I've achieved. I was very concerned about what impact it would have on my children, and when I told Louise, she looked at me and she said, "Wow." And I think for probably the next day she kept on saying, "Wow." And one of the first things she did was she went and looked at herself in the mirror and she said, "I'm looking at me, and now I want to find out who the other half of me is. Because she and I look very alike, and so people never had a problem seeing us as being related. But she knew that now that there was actually another part to her. And as it was, when she met her donor, who gave her some family photographs, she looked at a picture of his mother and she went, wow, we're related. So there was never a moment with her that there was ever any negativity, and certainly not with the others. I think my other daughter, who's sort of from a scientific background, she's went, yeah, okay. And my son, as I think boys perhaps tend to be, not quite as enthusiastic, or sort of like, oh yeah, that's what it is. We were lucky when Louise made approaches through Vata to find her donor. He had quite an unusual surname, and as such it was quite easy to track him down. And I think it's possibly one of the quickest responses they had. And so he appeared in the offices of Vata and handed over some information and said he'd be very willing to talk and share genetic stuff. Didn't know how much contact he'd want. But within a week that had changed completely, and he did want contact with his wife because they were both very much part of the donor program together. They saw that as being a couple. That's what they did it for, to give childless couples a chance to experience what they had themselves. They have 2 children. So we met him, and I was very apprehensive because I didn't know if this was going to be a one-off meeting, or if Louise might be worried about what would happen in the future, if there'd be any further contact, or would she be disappointed, or would he be disappointed. I wasn't quite sure how it was all going to go. And it went exceptionally well, and they're very much part of our lives now. And her older brother sent, I think the first time she really got a sense of being part of the family is he sent her a birthday card to his sister. So that was a very nice moment for her, to knowing that she's got special people in her life who care about her. I think it's certainly something to be encouraged, is to get further information, perhaps before broaching the subject, because you're not quite sure how much is out there, and the way to tell people. I took advice with some of the literature that was on offer at Vata as well, to read that retrospectively and see if I'd done the right thing or not. And I'm lucky in my case it worked, but I think it could be very difficult if you weren't prepared to know how to handle the answers, and that your children might throw at you if you